The ranch had been in my family for nearly 70 years, long before the suburbs arrived, before the shopping centers, before the endless rows of identical houses spread across the valley. The property had been open grazing land, stretching across rolling hills and shallow creeks. My grandfather had bought the acreage after returning from military service. My father expanded it. When he retired, I took over. At just over 400 acres, the ranch sat directly against the western edge of a growing residential development known as Cedar Ridge Estates. The neighborhood consisted of roughly 70 homes, governed by an aggressive homeowners association that seemed determined to control every blade of grass within its borders. For years, the relationship between the ranch and the HOA had been strained. The HOA board frequently complained about livestock visible from the neighborhood trails. They complained about ranch equipment parked near fences. They complained about dust during dry months and mud during rainy months. Every few months another letter would arrive, demanding some new accommodation, despite the fact that the ranch had existed decades before the first Cedar Ridge home was ever built. Most of the complaints were ignored. The property was private land. The ranch operations were legal. Life went on. At least, it did until the spring construction began. The first signs appeared in March. Heavy equipment started showing up near the shared boundary line between the ranch and Cedar Ridge. Bulldozers, excavators, utility trucks and survey crews appeared almost daily. Initially, nothing seemed unusual. Development was constant in the area. New homes were always being built somewhere. The crews remained close to the neighborhood, and no one paid much attention. Then one morning, while checking fences along the northern pasture, I noticed fresh tire tracks cutting through a section of ranch land. The tracks were deep, heavy, recent. Someone had driven equipment nearly half a mile inside the property. The discovery immediately raised concerns. The ranch wasn't open to public traffic. Access roads were clearly marked. Gates remained locked. Any contractor working legally in the area would know exactly where property lines existed. Yet the tracks continued. Following them led across a creek crossing and into a patch of trees near the eastern ridge. There, hidden from the road, lay evidence of excavation. The ground had been disturbed. Fresh soil covered a trench that stretched hundreds of feet before disappearing towards Cedar Ridge. The trench had already been backfilled. Grass seed had been spread over the surface. Whoever performed the work had clearly attempted to make it appear natural. At first glance, it looked like utility construction, water, electric, telecommunications, something buried underground. The discovery was concerning enough that I contacted the county planning office. The response was surprising. No permits existed for utility work on the ranch. No easements had been filed. No right-of-way agreements appeared in county records. As far as official documentation showed, nobody had authorization to install anything beneath the property. That answer transformed mild concern into serious suspicion. A week later, another discovery made matters worse. While repairing fencing near the excavation site, one of the ranch hands uncovered a section of bright green utility marking tape protruding from the soil. The tape identified sewer infrastructure, not water, not electrical, sewer. The implication was impossible to ignore. Someone had buried sewer lines under private property without permission. Still, assumptions weren't enough. Proof was needed. The following weekend, a private surveyor was hired to inspect the area. Using property maps and utility locating equipment, he spent nearly 2 days tracing underground pathways. His findings were astonishing. A major sewer line appeared to cross nearly 3,000 feet of ranch land before connecting directly into Cedar Ridge Estates. The line wasn't old. The materials were modern. Installation appeared recent. Most importantly, no recorded easement existed anywhere along its route. The surveyor seemed almost as shocked as everyone else. Infrastructure projects involving sewer systems required planning, permits, engineering approvals, inspections, and legal access rights. Entire departments existed specifically to prevent unauthorized installations. Yet somehow, a sewer line appeared to have materialized beneath private ranch land without any official record. The situation became even stranger when inquiries were sent to the utility contractors working near Cedar Ridge. Most refused to comment. A few claimed no knowledge. Others suddenly stopped returning calls. The silence felt deliberate, as if everyone involved understood something they didn't want discussed. Weeks passed. The investigation continued quietly. County officials reviewed records. Surveyors collected measurements. Attorneys examined property documents. Meanwhile, construction activity around Cedar Ridge seemed to increase. More trucks arrived. More work crews appeared. The HOA board remained unusually active. Residents reported special meetings and infrastructure discussions, though details remained vague. Then came the incident that changed everything. It happened shortly after midnight on a Thursday. A severe thunderstorm moved through the valley. Heavy rain hammered the region for hours. Creeks rose rapidly. Water rushed across low sections of the ranch. The storm itself wasn't unusual. Similar weather occurred every spring. What happened afterward was, at sunrise, dozens of vehicles lined the entrance to Cedar Ridge Estates. Contractor trucks, maintenance crews, county utility vehicles, emergency service personnel. The neighborhood looked like a disaster zone. Within hours, rumors began spreading. The entire sewer system serving Cedar Ridge had failed. 70 homes suddenly found themselves without functioning service. Toilets backed up. Drains stopped working. Wastewater systems shut down completely. Residents woke up to an infrastructure nightmare. The timing seemed impossible to ignore. The same neighborhood connected to the mysterious sewer line had suddenly lost service overnight. By late afternoon, utility workers were scrambling across the area searching for the cause. Excavation equipment arrived. Survey teams appeared. County officials conducted emergency inspections. Then a county engineer requested immediate access to the ranch. The reason became clear within minutes. The storm had exposed part of the buried line near the creek crossing. Fast-moving water had eroded soil covering the installation. Several sections of pipe now protruded from the ground. For the first time, everyone could see exactly what had been hidden beneath the ranch. The exposed line matched the route identified during the private survey. It wasn't a small residential connection. It was a major sewer trunk line. The engineer's expression said everything. This wasn't supposed to be there. As more inspectors arrived, the situation escalated rapidly. Records were checked again. Permits were reviewed again. Maps were examined again. The answers remained unchanged. No easement. No authorization, no legal right to place infrastructure on the property, yet 70 homes appeared dependent on that very line. Standing beside the exposed pipe, looking across the ranch towards Cedar Ridge, one uncomfortable question became impossible to avoid. If the neighborhood's sewer system depended on infrastructure that never should have existed, who approved it? And more importantly, who had been hiding it all these years? The answers would begin emerging within days, and when they did, they would reveal a scheme far larger than anyone imagined. To uncover the truth, investigators would need to dig deeper than the exposed pipe itself. They would need to follow the trail all the way back to the HOA board that had quietly built an entire utility system beneath someone else's land. The story spread through the county faster than anyone expected. By the Monday following the sewer failure, nearly everyone in the area had heard some version of the same rumor. 70 homes had lost sewer service because a major underground line crossed private ranch land without permission. What began as a local infrastructure problem quickly became the biggest controversy the county had seen in years. The exposed pipe near the creek crossing had become the center of attention. County inspectors arrived daily. Engineers photographed every section. Surveyors marked property boundaries with bright flags that stretched across pastures and hillsides. Attorneys representing multiple parties suddenly appeared at the ranch, each carrying thick folders filled with maps and documents. Meanwhile, Cedar Ridge residents were demanding answers. For years, homeowners had faithfully paid HOA fees, believing those funds maintained community infrastructure responsibly. Now many were learning for the first time that a critical part of their sewer system might not have been legal at all. Temporary sanitation services had been brought into the neighborhood, but they were expensive and inconvenient. Portable facilities appeared throughout the development. Emergency pumping operations ran around the clock. Every passing day increased costs. Every passing day increased frustration. And every passing day revealed more questions than answers. The first major breakthrough came from county records. An investigator assigned to the case spent several days comparing infrastructure permits dating back nearly a decade. At first, nothing unusual appeared. Cedar Ridge had followed the normal approval process during its original development. Roads, utilities, drainage systems, and common areas all appeared properly documented. The problem emerged several years later. Records showed that Cedar Ridge had experienced significant population growth after an expansion phase added dozens of new homes. That expansion created an unexpected problem. The neighborhood's original sewer capacity was no longer sufficient. Engineering reports warned that upgrades would eventually become necessary. Those upgrades would be expensive, very expensive. The HOA board faced a difficult decision: either spend substantial money constructing a legal connection to a municipal sewer corridor located several miles away, or find a cheaper alternative. At some point, according to documents uncovered during the investigation, the board began exploring alternative routes. That was where things became suspicious. Meeting minutes from several years earlier contained strange references to private utility opportunities and alternative infrastructure solutions. The language was vague, almost intentionally vague. No specific locations were identified. No routes were described. No maps were attached. Yet multiple discussions focused on reducing construction costs. One figure appeared repeatedly throughout the documents, the HOA president serving at the time. His name surfaced again and again in reports, emails, and planning notes. According to records, he had personally overseen several infrastructure committees. He had pushed aggressively for budget reductions, and he had repeatedly assured homeowners that sewer expansion costs would remain manageable. Those promises now looked very different. The second breakthrough came from a retired contractor. After seeing news coverage of the exposed sewer line, he contacted county investigators. Years earlier, his company had submitted a bid for utility work involving Cedar Ridge. The project never moved forward. At the time, he assumed another contractor offered a better price. Now he wasn't so sure. His records included preliminary route maps provided during the bidding process. Those maps immediately caught investigators' attention. The proposed sewer route crossed directly through the ranch, exactly where the exposed line had been discovered. The contractor had originally rejected the proposal. His notes explained why. No easement existed. No legal access rights existed. Any route crossing the ranch would require permission from the property owner. Without that permission, construction couldn't legally proceed. The project was abandoned, or at least, that was what he believed. Investigators soon discovered another contractor had eventually taken over. Unlike the retired contractor, this company had actually completed the installation. What happened next shocked everyone. When county officials requested project documentation, the contractor claimed all records had been lost during a corporate merger. Construction permits were incomplete. Inspection records were missing. Engineering approvals couldn't be located. The explanations sounded increasingly suspicious. Under legal pressure, additional files eventually surfaced. Those files revealed something extraordinary. Someone had submitted paperwork identifying the sewer route as crossing a utility corridor rather than private ranch land. The maps had been altered. Property boundaries had been removed. Key sections appeared edited. The documents created the appearance of legal access where none existed. The discovery transformed the investigation overnight. This was no longer merely a question of negligence. Someone had actively concealed the true route. Someone had knowingly approved construction through land they didn't own. The county launched a formal inquiry. Soon afterward, another bombshell emerged. Internal HOA emails were recovered through legal requests. Those messages painted a troubling picture. Several board members had expressed concerns before construction began. Questions had been raised about property rights. Questions had been raised about easements. Questions had been raised about legal exposure. Instead of addressing those concerns directly, leadership repeatedly reassured everyone that necessary arrangements had been handled. No evidence suggested those arrangements ever existed. In fact, investigators could not find a single document proving the ranch owner had been contacted. Not one letter, not one phone record, not one meeting request, nothing. The entire project appeared to have proceeded under the assumption that nobody would notice. For years, that assumption worked. The line remained buried. Grass covered excavation sites. Residents used the sewer system daily, without realizing where it actually ran. The secret remained hidden beneath thousands of feet of ranch land until the storm arrived. Nature had accomplished what audits, inspections, and paperwork reviews never had. It exposed the truth. As investigators dug deeper, attention increasingly focused on the former HOA president. His role seemed impossible to ignore. Many of the key decisions traced back to his administration. Many missing records originated during his tenure. Many questionable approvals carried his signature. Then another development changed everything. County engineers completed a full inspection of the exposed sewer route. Their findings were alarming. The installation itself failed multiple modern engineering standards. Sections lacked proper reinforcement. Several crossings near waterways violated environmental guidelines. Parts of the system appeared rushed. Corners had been cut. Costs had been reduced wherever possible. What initially looked like an isolated legal problem was becoming a broader infrastructure scandal. The consequences grew more serious by the day. State regulators became involved. Environmental agencies requested reports. Insurance companies launched their own investigations. Attorneys representing homeowners began preparing lawsuits. Everyone wanted answers. Everyone wanted accountability. Then came the discovery that pushed the controversy into entirely new territory. While examining archived financial records, investigators found a series of payments connected to the sewer project. The amounts were substantial. Hundreds of thousands of dollars had moved between contractors, consultants, and third-party entities. Most appeared legitimate. One transaction did not. The payment led to a consulting company that existed for less than 18 months. Its listed address belonged to a vacant office suite. Its business records were nearly non-existent, and one of its listed officers had a direct connection to the former HOA president. Investigators immediately began tracing the money. The possibility that financial misconduct accompanied the illegal construction suddenly became very real. As news of the discovery spread, panic started growing within Cedar Ridge's leadership. Several former board members hired attorneys. Others refused interview requests. A few stopped responding altogether. The atmosphere shifted dramatically. People who once appeared confident now seemed nervous. People who once denied knowledge now claimed incomplete memories. The walls were beginning to close in. Back at the ranch, crews continued documenting every foot of the unauthorized sewer line. The evidence was overwhelming. There was no dispute about where the infrastructure sat. There was no dispute about who owned the land. There was no dispute about the absence of easements. The facts had become undeniable. What remained unclear was how far the scheme extended and who ultimately benefited from it. Those answers were buried within years of financial records, emails, and construction documents. Investigators were getting closer, much closer. And before long, a former board member would decide to protect himself by revealing information nobody expected. Information that would expose exactly how the secret sewer project had been approved. Information that would place several powerful people directly at the center of the scandal. The fallout from that revelation would threaten the future of Cedar Ridge itself. And it would begin with a single meeting that someone finally decided to talk about. The breakthrough arrived from the person investigators least expected. For weeks, former HOA board members had remained silent. Attorneys advised caution. Public statements were carefully worded. Questions were ignored or redirected. Everyone seemed determined to avoid responsibility. Then one former board member decided he didn't want to be the last person left holding the blame. According to investigators, the individual requested a private meeting and brought several boxes of documents that had been stored in his garage for years. Most of the material appeared ordinary at first glance: meeting agendas, financial reports, engineering proposals, and committee notes. Buried among those records, however, was something far more important: a set of handwritten notes from a closed HOA executive session. The meeting had taken place years before construction began. The notes revealed discussions that never appeared in official records. For the first time, investigators could see what had happened behind closed doors. The HOA leadership had known exactly what they were doing. The neighborhood sewer capacity problem had been discussed extensively. Multiple engineering firms had presented legal solutions. Several routes were evaluated. Every legitimate option came with a substantial price tag. The estimates were staggering. Extending a properly permitted sewer connection through approved utility corridors would have required major construction and significant assessments on homeowners. Monthly HOA fees would likely have increased. Special assessments would almost certainly have been required. The board feared homeowner backlash. Instead of choosing the legal route, leadership began searching for shortcuts. The handwritten notes described discussions about the neighboring ranch. The land was largely undeveloped. Much of it sat beyond public view. Construction could be hidden from roads and nearby residents. Most importantly, using that route would save hundreds of thousands of dollars. The obstacle, of course, was permission. According to the notes, obtaining permission was considered uncertain and potentially expensive. At some point, the conversation shifted. Rather than discussing how to obtain authorization, board leadership began discussing how to avoid needing it altogether. The notes described assumptions that nobody would ever notice underground construction. They described confidence that records could be handled quietly. They described expectations that future boards would never question completed infrastructure. The plan depended entirely on secrecy. And for years, Secrecy worked. The revelations devastated Cedar Ridge homeowners. Many residents had purchased homes long after the sewer project was completed. They knew nothing about hidden infrastructure routes. They knew nothing about altered documents. They knew nothing about questionable approvals. Yet now they faced enormous consequences. Lawsuits began arriving almost immediately. The ranch filed claims related to trespass, unauthorized use of property, environmental damages, and restoration costs. Homeowners filed claims against former HOA leadership. Insurance companies launched recovery actions, seeking reimbursement for emergency expenses. Contractors found themselves facing investigations into permitting violations. What started as a sewer outage had evolved into a legal disaster involving multiple parties. Then investigators uncovered the final piece of the puzzle, the mysterious consulting company. Financial specialists spent weeks tracing transactions connected to the sewer project. Eventually, they identified the purpose behind several unusual payments. Money had been routed through the consulting company before returning to individuals connected to the project. The amounts weren't massive compared to the overall construction costs, but they were significant enough to raise serious concerns. The findings suggested certain decision-makers may have personally benefited from selecting the unauthorized route. That discovery transformed public perception overnight. Until then, some residents believed leadership had simply made reckless decisions in an attempt to save money. Now, many suspected something worse. The appearance of personal financial gain changed everything. County authorities referred portions of the investigation to higher agencies. Additional inquiries followed. Former leaders who once projected confidence suddenly disappeared from public view. Several sold their homes. Others moved away entirely. A few became the subjects of ongoing legal proceedings. Meanwhile, engineers delivered their final recommendation regarding the sewer line itself. The conclusion was unavoidable. The line could not remain where it was. Regardless of how many years it had operated, it occupied private land without authorization. The installation violated multiple requirements. Allowing it to remain would create continuing liability for everyone involved. A replacement route had to be constructed. The cost was enormous. Ironically, the price exceeded what the HOA would have paid had it followed legal procedures from the beginning. Years of legal fees, emergency repairs, environmental reviews, reconstruction costs, and litigation had multiplied the expense several times over. The shortcut had become the most expensive option imaginable. Construction of a new legal sewer connection began the following year. The project took months. Roads were excavated. New utility corridors were established. Permits were reviewed repeatedly. Every step received intense scrutiny. Nobody wanted another scandal. Eventually, the new system became operational. The old, unauthorized line was permanently abandoned. Crews removed sections where practical and sealed others according to environmental regulations. For the first time in years, no active sewer infrastructure crossed the ranch. The property was finally restored to its rightful condition. The legal battles continued long afterward. Some cases settled quietly. Others stretched through courts for years. Several contractors faced professional consequences. Former board members spent substantial amounts defending themselves. Insurance disputes generated mountains of paperwork. Yet despite the complexity, one fact remained clear throughout every proceeding. The ranch owner had done nothing wrong. The property had been used without permission. Infrastructure had been installed without authorization. The evidence never supported any other conclusion. As the years passed, Cedar Ridge slowly recovered. New board members were elected. Governance procedures changed dramatically. Financial transparency increased. Independent reviews became mandatory for major projects. Residents demanded accountability that previous leadership had failed to provide. The scandal became a cautionary tale repeated throughout the region. Local governments referenced the case during infrastructure training sessions. Property attorneys discussed it as an example of easement violations. Developers cited it when explaining the importance of proper permitting. What happened at Cedar Ridge became a textbook example of how small shortcuts can create enormous consequences. Back at the ranch, life gradually returned to normal. The pastures remained green. The creek continued flowing through the valley. Livestock grazed the same hills that had supported generations of the family. The exposed trench eventually disappeared beneath restored soil and vegetation. Visitors would never know that a major legal battle had unfolded there. Only a few faint records and court documents remained. Looking back, the most remarkable part of the story wasn't the illegal construction itself, it was how long the secret survived. Dozens of people participated in planning. Multiple organizations became involved. Thousands of feet of infrastructure were installed. Years passed without discovery. Yet in the end, the entire scheme collapsed because of something no one could control: a storm. One night of heavy rain exposed what paperwork had hidden and what secrecy had protected. The water washed away soil, the pipe emerged, and the truth followed. 70 homeowners woke up without sewer service that morning, believing they were facing a routine utility problem. Instead, they unknowingly became part of a scandal that would reshape their community for years. The HOA had gambled that nobody would ever discover what lay beneath the ranch. For a long time, that gamble seemed successful. Then the ground opened, the evidence surfaced, and every hidden decision came into the light. In the end, the unauthorized sewer line didn't merely fail, it exposed an entire chain of deception buried beneath it. And once the truth emerged, there was no way to bury it again. The end.